Welcome to the Future of Resolution, Miles Mediation and Arbitration's podcast. On today's episode of the Future of Resolution podcast, we have Marty Ellin, Executive Director of the Atlanta Volunteer Lawyers Foundation, the largest provider of pro bono legal services in Atlanta. Marty has served in this role since 2001 and is a driving force behind the organization's commitment to serve underprivileged communities and provide equal access to justice for all.
I'm here today with Marty Ellin, the Executive Director of the Atlanta Volunteer Lawyers Foundation, better known as AVLF. Marty, I appreciate your coming in today.
My pleasure, Lee. Glad to be here. Thank you.
You and I have known each other a long time. I knew you before you were at AVLF. That shows how long I've known you. I knew you when you were a practicing lawyer. And you're truly one of the good people in the world, and it's my pleasure to call you a friend. So,
that goes both ways. Thank you, sir.
I appreciate that. So we wanted to talk about AVLF, and I assume a lot of people know about it. It's very well publicized and a great organization, but I'd like to give us a little bit of background about how AVLF came to be and its mission statement.
Sure. Thanks. Thanks for this opportunity. Thanks to you and to Miles Mediation. Let me frame it this way. If you are resource poor in Atlanta and you have a legal problem, what do? The answer is, for most people, nothing, and they live with the consequence because they don't know how to address the problem. They could try to hire a lawyer, but it's very hard to afford a lawyer now. They could try and resolve the problem on their own, but if you spent any time in the courthouse or with the judicial process, it is not a user-friendly process. They could go to our legal services organizations, which are terrific, but historically oversubscribed and underfunded. What's left are the private lawyers in the community. If there is an answer, it lies with the private lawyers and their willingness to do volunteer work. So in the late 1970s, a group of lawyers who recognized that no matter how much money Congress ever gave to Atlanta Legal Aid and its sister organizations, there would never be enough to address the unmet civil legal needs of our community. They started trying to figure out a mechanism for corralling the interests of the private lawyers. And I want to say here, I think our profession sometimes gets a bad rap because it's an incredibly generous profession. I think most people graduate law school knowing they're going to give away some of their time. How do we create meaningful opportunities for them to do so? How do we focus their interests and make them, right.
Because I think a lot of the problem with lawyers also is that, I want to volunteer, but how do I do it? How do I find the people to volunteer or the organizations to volunteer for? So
exactly that.
Yeah.
So back in the late 1970s, there was a collection. I'll throw some names out in case some older lawyers are listening. There was John Chandler and Charlie Lester, who were at Sutherland. There was Neil Batson, who was the he was the president of the Atlanta Bar Association at that time. There was Robbie Doxson, who was the director of the Atlanta Legal Aid Society. And they went to some friends of theirs in the legislature, a man named Sidney Marcus and a man named Charles Carnes. And that group, with one or two others, came up with an idea. What if we created an entity that would recruit lawyers to do volunteer work on behalf of poor people in our community? So they put together a law of local application, and it said in every county of 600,000 or more in the census, there shall be created an entity that, and the language goes on to describe like what AVLF is. Now, of course, at that time, only Fulton County qualified. That was the idea originally. Now 4 counties qualified. DeKalb and Gwinnett and Cobb all qualify for that. But the funding mechanism was that there was $1 out of every state court filing that would go to this entity. So we were born in 1979, the Atlanta Volunteer Lawyers Foundation. And at the beginning, there was a gentleman whose name was Brian Stone. Brian was a lawyer. You're smiling. I think you probably knew
Brian.
him.
I knew Brian.
He knew everybody. He smoked a pipe. He stood outside what was then the epicenter of lawyers in Atlanta, the Equitable Building.
Right.
And people would walk down the street and he'd say, Lee, you're a lawyer. And he'd take a file and he'd hand it to you saying, show this some love, or whatever people said in 1979 about, can you help us with this case? We try to be a tad more sophisticated about how we take care of things now. But Brian was, which I'll tell you about in a few moments, Brian was our director for about 6 years. He was followed by Debbie Siegel,
Right.
who is well known not only for her stint at Atlanta Volunteer Lawyers Foundation, but she went on to be Kilpatrick's pro bono counsel. I think she was the first in this community to have a pro bono status like that. She was a partner at the firm. And then I took over this job in 2001. But from our very humble beginnings, we got traction right away because the concept is a solid one.
And it was well received in the legal community.
It is. People were glad to know, if I have time, here's a place I can go where I can find people who will not only refer to me a quality case, but will mentor and supervise me through the process.
Right, because that's the fear, I think, of a lot of people in volunteering is, for instance, housing or issues that, if you don't practice in the housing area, in, evictions, which I assume is one of the big areas, then you're worried that, how do I take this on? I'm going to commit malpractice. Right. I don't know what I'm doing.
Well, importantly, A, we have malpractice insurance for every lawyer.
But it's better not to commit malpractice.
B, to make sure they never need to use it. And in my 20 years, we've had one claim. Someone was unhappy and filed a $70 million claim against us, which they dismissed within about 3 weeks. But no, because what we do is we say to lawyers, if you work with us, we will mentor you and supervise you through the process. For most of our programs, people have to do a training first. Right. And when we talk about the substantive programs, I'll make sure to mention the training that comes with it.
And also, we'll talk a little bit more about this, but besides just even the training, it's that if I have a question, there's someone I can call at AVLF and say, all right, well, can you point me in the right direction? Tell me how to do this. What am I doing? So that's helpful also for lawyers who are in areas in which they don't normally practice.
You're right, Lee. We have a substantive expert on staff for every one of the areas in which we practice for that particular purpose.
Which is fabulous, and they're great resources.
Which I think is critical because the world's greatest intellectual property lawyer doesn't necessarily know a thing about landlord-tenant law.
Right.
And the needs of our clients are widespread and dramatic and usually immediate, and we've got to plug somebody in who has the capacity to help right now. And that's why we offer the training, and that's why we have the hands-on staff support.
Well, and since we're on this, let's talk a little bit about the training, and let's talk a little bit about volunteer opportunities for lawyers through AVLF. We have the Saturday Morning Lawyers program and other opportunities. Why don't you tell us about some of those?
If I may, Lee, let me set this up by giving you an idea of the breadth of the work we do.
Absolutely.
We have a program known as our Safe and Stable Families program. And that has two components. The first is our Intimate Partner Abuse program. Georgia has one courthouse-based lawyer staff full-time walk-in clinic for victims of intimate partner abuse.
In all of Georgia?
All of Georgia, and that is in the Fulton County Courthouse. And we staff the Safe Families Office with a group called Partnership Against Domestic Violence. They do shelter and safety planning, and we do the legal support. So that if you have been the victim of intimate partner abuse or fear you will be, or stalking, and you come down to the courthouse to see what protection the law can offer you, they will send you up to the courtroom that we staff. And we will explain to you what your legal options are. One of them is to seek a temporary protective order. And if you're interested in following on that, we will help you fill out a petition. We will present you to the judge. And I'm proud to tell you that 80% of the, I'm about to say women, it's not only women, but 80% of the people who come in for a protective order walk out with one that day. Now, that protective order is good for 30 days. If you're going to want an extension of that order, you need to come back to the court within that 30 days and in a contested hearing face your alleged abuser.
And you'll represent them at that too?
Yes.
Or someone through AVLF?
You bet. Now, look, it's really hard for victims of intimate partner abuse to get to the courthouse. I mean, it's really hard to find the courage. It's hard to logistically. And if they're going to come in, we're going to stand with them from the minute they walk in. But it's even harder for them to come back and look at the man or person who has been abusing them and tell the court in a public hearing about what has happened. So most of the work that we do with private attorneys who will volunteer with our program is to train them in the law and psychology of domestic violence, and then train them to represent victims in this, what we call the second hearing. The first is that ex parte hearing before the judge to get the initial petition, and the second is to get the 12-month extension. And you know, Leigh, at the beginning, it was great because people would come back and say, I feel much safer. I've got this protection. But can you help me with something else? Because I can't go back to that house now. My kids' clothes are there. Their books are there. My clothes are there. I can't, etc. Can you help me find another place to live? And we would have to throw up our hands. What we've done is we hired a social worker, and now 2 social workers to help with the wraparound services. So people, it was better. So people would come to us and say, I feel so much better. I'm safer. I'm well positioned. But I'm now ready to divorce the son of a gun. He's been hitting me for 7 years. Or I need a modification of the existing child support. I need a modification of the visitation. Can you help with that? Again, we had to throw up our hands. But a wonderful thing has happened, and that is our family law practitioners in the city of Atlanta have come out very strongly. And now we can provide that level of support as well.
And so that's a referral type program, I guess, that you have your list of people who have said that they're willing to volunteer, and then you refer them?
Exactly
clients,
that.
as opposed to coming in on a piecemeal basis. So it would be someone, if I did that practice, I would say, call me if you need me. And so you'd reach out and say, can you take this matter now?
Yes.
Okay.
We do a lot of recruiting. We spend a lot of time going every place we're invited, and frankly, a lot of places we're not. But we go to the section breakfasts, and we go places to make sure people know that there are volunteer opportunities. This one is a discrete circumstance. You know going in what client you will have. You know how much time it will take. And here's one place to mention that fear you're talking about. People think you have to be a litigator in order to work with AVLFs. You do not. You do not. You graduate law school with an enormous amount of understanding about how to interview a client. And if you do not want to stand up in the court of law, we will stand second chair with you. We'll stand first chair while you watch the first time. There is a lot of support in that circumstance to get the case tried.
Well, and I know that in my firm, we have a lot of real estate closing lawyers who don't do litigation, and they volunteered, and it's been a great experience for them because they get some exposure, and some of it isn't, and we'll talk more about some of the programs, but and some of the services you provide. It's not in the courtroom litigation necessarily. Sometimes it's just providing common sense advice and some legal knowledge to help the clients along.
Look, most cases settle. And negotiation is something we all learn in law school, and we all learn no matter what the practice is. People can do it. So we're happy. Last year, there were more than 3,500 visitors to the Safe Families office. I'm sorry that those numbers keep going higher, but we recognized that we are very effective responsively. People come to us, and we know how to help them once they have been abused. What if there was some opportunity to get closer to the circumstance? So a new element of our work is a mobile advocacy piece. We are going out of the courthouse into the community to work with clients. One of the places we started was with the prosecutors and the police to teach them to be more sophisticated about what constitutes domestic violence and what to do about it when they find it. Happy to tell you, our team has been very successful, so much so that we're on the speed dial at the precincts. And they sometimes will call at 10 o'clock to our lawyers and say, can you come out here now? Let me tell you what the officer sees. And we'd love to have your idea about how to help with this.
I mean, imagine from the police's point of view, they'd rather not have to arrest people than show up in court and try to testify and do all this stuff. If they can diffuse the situation,
right,
that works better for them too.
Yeah, that is certainly true. But also, when they walk in and she says, he hit me, and he says, she hit me, right. All right, both of you stand in the corner and nobody move until I figured out what to do. What if the police officer were more sophisticated about an understanding of what to look for to figure out what in fact has probably happened? Right. So we're very proud of that program. So that is our intimate partner abuse program. The other program under our Safe and Stable Families side is our Guardian Ad Litem program. For those who may not know, when there is a high conflict divorce and a custody battle as a consequence, and the judge does not know what is in the best interest of the children, the judge will frequently ask for help from a guardian for the purpose of the litigation. The guardian doesn't work for either of the sides. The guardian works for the court. The guardian, we train guardians in the understanding what's in the best interest of children. It's about a 4 or 5 hour training. And when the court calls and says we need help, we will assign a pro bono guardian to help the court by interviewing the parents, interviewing the children, but also the grandparents and the teachers and the people in the community, and then offering a report to the court about what will work best for the children. It's very helpful in getting cases settled. It's helpful in the event that the case goes to trial. A quick story. In 2011, we lost our last grant. You may remember that the economy was not so good at that time and grants were drying up, and we lost our last grant for this program. So I called then Chief Judge Cynthia Wright, and I said, Your Honor, please don't send us any more guardian cases. We can't help you. We'll honor the 80 we have open now, but don't send any more. She said, no. I said, excuse me? She said, I'll call you back in 3 days. I think she thought maybe she could call Fulton County and get them to change their mind about a grant. Well, she called me back in about 4 days and said, well, I couldn't do what I thought I was going to do, but we can't run the courthouse without you. So I took up a collection among the 20 judges on the Superior Court bench. We raised $21,000. Will that help?
From their pockets.
From their pockets.
That's fabulous.
Unbelievable.
Right.
And it kept our program alive. And I'm happy to say that when news of that came out, a number of the members of the family law community stepped up. The Atlanta Bar Association Family Law Section gave us a grant. And one of the law firms in town, Warner Bates, said, how may we help? And every year since then, they have thrown a party where they raise enough money to sustain this program. Just very
fabulous.
Proud about how that's happened. The other part of our work largely falls under the umbrella of safe and stable homes. We have, as you mentioned, the Saturday Lawyer Program. John Chandler and Charlie Lester were running that program from the corner of their desks when they were associates at Sutherland. That's what generated this. So every Saturday that there isn't a federal holiday, so 45 or so Saturdays a year, we have 16 clients who come to our office. We recruit 8 lawyers. We have about 4 or 5 paralegals. We have law students. It is a huge community of people dedicated to helping people who work during the week and can't come in to see a lawyer then, who can come on a Saturday. We ask the lawyers who are there to do a thorough and sifting interview. Look, we get about 7,500 phone calls a year. We try and sift through them as well as possible to figure out, is this a good case? Is there a cognizable legal interest? Can a lawyer help?
Right.
But Leigh, we haven't seen the documents. We haven't looked into people's eyes and assessed their credibility. So we say to the lawyers, this is a skill you have. Please find out what you think. About 80% of the time people come back and say, yeah, it's a pretty good case. You should assign a lawyer. And then we say to them, are you interested in one? Right. They get emotionally connected, and about 80% of those times they say yes. And if not, we have law firms that have said to us, we'll take the flow of extra cases. So the Saturday program is a great way to help in 2 areas, housing and wage claim. Let me step aside real quickly and mention that in 2015, we had a strategic planning session and we had a major question in front of us, Leigh. Do we go wider? Because there were a whole host of unmet civil legal needs in our community. Should AVLF try and take them on? Should we go into counties where there is inadequate legal support? Or do we stay with the existing programs we have and go deeper? We chose the latter.
And were you looking at expanding to other areas as well, not just other locations?
We were asked to take on immigration work. We were asked to take on a number of items. They're best left to groups that have expertise. We didn't have the in-house expertise of which you and I spoke, so we stayed with this program. So we've gone much deeper into housing work in particular. We're the largest provider of tenant representation. So we have an eviction defense program. Your listeners may or may not know that there are about 40,000 dispossessory warrants sworn out every year in Fulton County alone. And the problem that we see is a problem of housing instability, and it has so much impact. We don't represent people who are being evicted from their homes because of drug busts in their home, because of they're in gangs, because of violence, because they've acted out and behaved. But what we're talking about with 98% of our cases are conditions cases.
By conditions of the housing?
Yes. The landlords who fail or refuse to honor the housing code. Those are almost all of our cases. And the great news for our program is this. If a tenant comes to a landlord and says, you've got to fix the hole in the roof,
right.
Rain is coming in, the rats, my children are starting to name the rats, they see them
right.
so often, heartbreaking stuff.
Yeah.
The landlords frequently don't do anything. But if I go to you, Leigh, and I as the tenant, and you write a demand letter on your firm's stationery, it's about a 48-hour turnover. And the roof is repaired. Lawyers can do so much good so quickly. Now, sometimes the landlords don't honor the letter. Sometimes they don't have the resources to fix things up, they say. Sometimes it requires a trial. But most of these cases, if the lawyer will stand up and say, you may not, then things get fixed and people don't have to move.
And obviously housing is an important issue that everyone knows about. One of the things that you and I had talked about earlier before we started today was some of the impact that housing has. And you were talking about the Thomasville Heights program that AVLF undertook. And I think that's a fascinating program and a tremendous one. And I'd love to talk about that a little bit.
Well, thanks for your interest. About 5 years ago, actually more than that now, 6 or 7, Thomasville Heights Elementary School was among the most failing elementary schools in the state.
And tell people approximately where it's located.
If you go south on Moreland towards 675, it is right up against the penitentiary. And I mean right up against it. It is next to Forest Cove Apartments. And unfortunately, part of the reason that the school was failing so badly was that they had a 40% student turnover rate.
And what does that mean?
That means that 4 in 10 children was new to the school every year, that children were not finishing their education. And it's hard to institutionalize education if the kids don't stay in the school.
So they're moving to different schools every year.
Yes. And what we're told by the educators is that every time a child moves, they lose 3 months. So you get a young student who is in 3rd grade who's been to 4 different schools. No wonder they're not on track.
Of course.
And you also know the information that suggests if a child can't read by 3rd grade, the likelihood of them ending up not being successful in life, possibly even being in prison, is significantly higher. Zip code is the most revealing information we have about whether a child has a chance at success.
Right.
And the schools on the south side of Atlanta and PUV and some of the close circumstances have been unsuccessful in part because 40, 50, 60% student turnover. Could there be anything done about it? Was the question that was asked by the good folks at PurposeBuilt Communities who were tasked with coming in and changing that school.
And they were tasked by APS?
Yes.
Okay.
APS went to them and said, you've shown dramatic success over at Eastlake, where the elementary school there now is in the top 20% of the state. Can you do for Thomasville what you did over at Eastlake? They said, we'll try. When they heard about the turnover rate, they asked, what's the turnover rate based on? We were in the community and said, we think it's housing instability. And they said, can you address that? So one of the things that we did with a grant from PurposeBuilt was to put a lawyer and a community advocate in the elementary school, right up at the front next to the principal's office.
And why was that more effective, do you think?
Okay. People may not come see a lawyer about their housing problems. And there's a lot of reasons that they don't. They're afraid of their landlords. It's logistically difficult to get downtown.
They may not know where to go.
They don't know about AVLF.
How to find a lawyer, sure.
They will now because of this broadcast. But they walk their kids to school every day. And when they do, and they see the lawyer standing out front with an AVLF pin and information about AVLF and saying, how can we help?
And I assume word of mouth starts getting around that there's this lawyer here who can help you.
So Attorney Leigh, I've got mold growing on my walls. There's a hole in the roof. The kitchen floor has collapsed. My landlord won't do anything about it. Can you help? Well, yes, we can. So remember that AVLF, while we have a staff of 15 lawyers, our lawyers don't do most of the legal work. We recruit lawyers from the community, 400, 500, 600, 700 different lawyers a year, and we train them, and they're the people who actually try most of the cases. So we recruited a large number of lawyers and trained them in landlord-tenant law and went to work immediately representing the tenants in the housing that was next to Thomasville Heights Elementary School. The first 16 cases that we tried, and remember, these are affirmative cases on behalf of the tenant or representing the tenant when they're facing an eviction warrant, saying the tenant should not have to move because the landlord hasn't honored its obligation to make repair according to the housing code. And those wonderful volunteer lawyers won 14 of the first 16 cases.
Wow.
And one of the best things that happened to me was the management company for that landlord came out to the property and said, "My God, it's like everyone out here has their own lawyer." And we were able to say, "Yes, sir, they do." And the good news was that landlord stopped filing eviction warrants. It just wasn't working for them. They were spending a lot of money on attorney's fees. They were getting
Fighting
judgments against them that they would have to pay. So they started calling our lawyers saying, "We've got a problem with Ms. Jones. She keeps coming to complain about something. Can we talk this through?" So at the end of the very first year, the turnover rate dropped to 36%.
Wow.
Now, let me give full credit to PurposeBuilt Communities and PurposeBuilt Schools. We were a small part of the program that they instituted and made an enormous difference in that community. And at that school, Thomasville Heights had the second highest test score improvement rate of any elementary school in the APS system. But what happened is that the superintendent of schools came to PurposeBuilt folks and said, "This is clearly going to work. Things are significantly better, and right away, will you expand this program?" And they were nice enough to say, "We will if AVLF will come with us."
That's fabulous.
So we are now in 9 schools, not just PurposeBuilt schools, but Condesi. We're on the west side with the Blank. We're in Gideon's with Annie E. Casey. And I think this program can be a national model. We've gotten lots of interest from different places around the country, from funders, Kresge and the Gates Foundation. They're interested in knowing much more. We've gotten interest from school systems. And the only bit of turmoil we've had at the Atlanta Volunteer Lawyers Foundation was when we got a request from one organization saying, "We are the school system of Bermuda. Would you come and train us?" And there were a lot of takers for that. Yeah. So
Easy to get volunteers for that.
But we have between our eviction defense program, we call this our Standing with Our Neighbors program, and all the other work that the Safe and Stable Homes team does. We also have if someone in your family dies and you don't know what to do, you call the court and say, "My father passed, he has a will, he doesn't have a will, what do I do?"
Right.
They say, "Sorry, we can't give you legal advice on the phone." But they now are able to say, "But would you like to come see a lawyer?" The estate planning and probate section of the Atlanta Bar provides lawyers who staff that court. Every other Monday provide free 30-minute sessions to anyone who has a probate question.
That's fabulous.
Leigh, what we try and do is look into the community of of our Atlantans and figure out what are the unmet civil legal needs. We try and fashion a program to address them. We recruit lawyers, we train them, mentor them, and hopefully in that fashion lift the community.
Along those lines, there are 2 things I want to talk about with some of the listeners can do. The first is listeners who are lawyers, volunteer opportunities. So if I'm a lawyer and I say, "Gosh, this sounds great, I'd like to do it," 2 things are, number 1, I don't know where to go. How do I get in? How do I decide what I want to do? Number 2 is, yeah, but I'm practicing. I'm an associate at this firm. I've got to bill my time. I don't know that I have time to put I have a lot of extra time. So how would you address those questions from the lawyers?
Right. Happily, I was in private practice for about 20 years and fully understand the demands on associates, on partners, on everyone who is trying to keep an operation afloat and do quality work for their clients. So what we have done is to make sure we have an array of meaningful pro bono opportunities. We make sure that if you believe you have time, we will train you and stand with you, as I've mentioned. But the programs have discrete opportunities. They're not going to be open-ended, or if they are going to be with that possibility, you're going to know about it going in. So we welcome calls. Our volunteer engagement coordinator's name is Matilda Davis. She's at 678-681-6005 or mdavis@avlf.org.
And she is great.
She would love to hear from you. Look, we understand. The State Bar tells us that of the 60 or so thousand lawyers in the state, 18,000 of them have licenses to practice and live in Atlanta, and 14,000 of them are active in Atlanta. We work as hard as we can to let everyone know, and that's why I'm grateful to be here and have this opportunity, that we remember why you went to law school. We know that Atlanta is not just a community you drive through on your way to work. This is your home. This is the place you want to be, and you want to lend support and your time and your talent. We have a place for you, and we'll make sure that we give you an opportunity which can happily and easily coincide with the rest of your obligations in the community.
And that's the point, is that, and we've touched on this with lawyers, if you want to say, I'm available every week, or I'll take a case that might go on for months or years, you can do that. Or if you want to say, I just want to come in on Saturday, do a screening, and not take any cases, you can do that also.
Yes, you can. We love the law firms. We have some law firms that love to do the landlord-tenant work. And it's a game internally, because when they sue the landlords and they get judgments, it's a throwdown. I got $22,000 for this client, and which of course changes their lives.
Right.
And then someone comes in with a judgment that's $38,000, and the highest at the moment is $727,000 for one of our tenants.
Collectible?
We're working on that, but we think it probably is. But we love this community. We love, in our mind, we have sort of two or maybe even three constituencies. Certainly the clients who have, if they can't get a lawyer through the Atlanta Volunteer Lawyers Foundation, no other option when they have a legal problem. The lawyers, who we love so much, who give up their time and their talent and their treasure, and who earnestly believe in AVLF, but the community at large. The whole legal community is supportive of our sister organizations, and we work beautifully together. The third is the court. The court is earnestly interested in doing its job to be available and make the justice system approachable. But we're all in this together, and AVLF relishes its role.
And do you find, you just mentioned the court, and it made me think about this, do you find that judges are receptive to the AVLF lawyers or pro bono lawyers coming in on these type of cases?
Most of them, when they know it's an AVLF case, will take you first on the calendar. Some of the judges make a point in a crowded courtroom of saying, Mr. Wilco, stand up, please. Mr. Wilco, you're representing someone pro bono today through the Atlanta Volunteer Lawyers Foundation. Good on you, sir. I want to let you know how much the Superior Court appreciates the time you've given. Thank you, sir. That sort of thing never is a bad thing for a lawyer.
Fabulous. We talked about volunteer opportunities for lawyers, and obviously that's a huge part of who you are and what you need. The other part, and you touched on this a little bit, is finances. You talked about the grants that you've had. So let's talk about the different finance sources, because obviously this takes money to run.
Thank you so much. Yes, it does. We have revenue from three different sources. There is an add-on to the civil filing fees in the Fulton State and Magistrate Courts. So every time someone files a lawsuit in the state court, we get $2. Every time someone files a lawsuit in the magistrate court, we get $3. So please be as litigious as possible. That is a couple $100,000 of our $5 million budget. We get grants in good years. One thing I want to point out is we don't get any money from the federal government, the state government, the county, the city, other than through grants and irregularly through those. And we are grateful for every grant dollar. Most of the salaries of our staff lawyers are covered by grants, but recognize that's restricted funding. It may only be directed towards those salaries or whatever the purpose is. We need unrestricted funding, and that is the third pot of money. Those are the gifts from the individual lawyers of this community, the law firms, the corporations, the corporate legal departments, the vendors, everybody who is a part of the Atlanta legal community. And we have an annual campaign, and we thank everyone who is a donor to our annual campaign by offering them tickets to our wine tasting. And
which is an amazing event.
And I have to tell you, Leigh, I'm going to bet if we stopped 5 lawyers on the street and said AVLF, at least 2 of them would say, yeah, that's the wine tasting, right? And it's a good brand. I want them to know us for the volunteer work we're doing, but I'm proud about the wine tasting. So we are very lucky. We get more than 500 individuals to contribute to our campaign every year. I thank you and your family for the consistent, generous contributions you share with us. And we need this help. Again, it is the unrestricted income that allows us to sustain and even grow our programs. Because let me not pretend, at our best, and I say our, meaning us and Legal Aid and Pro Bono Partnership and the other organizations in this community, the Georgia Asylum and Immigration Network, Georgia Justice Project, it is predicted we take on maybe 20% of the unmet civil legal need. The demand is dramatic. And this is our home. And don't we have an affirmative obligation? And don't we love the chance to stand with our neighbors?
I wish you were a little more passionate about this, Marty. You seem not to care. I love talking to you because every time I do, I get so much more motivated, so much more energized. You're just amazing with this.
It is my pleasure. This is the best job I've ever had by a lot, and I've had some good ones. I really enjoy the chance to work here.
Well, speaking about this being your job, you've been doing this for 20 years now.
Yeah.
And I wanted to talk a little bit about how it's changed, what changes you've seen in the legal community and the receptiveness to the services that you're providing and the type of services that you need to provide over the past 20 years.
In the early part of this century, isn't that fun to say? In the early part of this century, we did not have the breadth of services that we now have available. There weren't the number of programs. The numbers I just mentioned, GAIN wasn't here, and Tahare wasn't here, and Georgia, and Pro Bono Partnership wasn't here, and that sort of thing. So there has been a broader understanding that as a community, we have a responsibility to provide broader, deeper services to those who otherwise can't access the things that you and I fortunately get to take for granted. You know, I woke up this morning, Leigh, and I was in a bed. And I had a roof over my head. Despite the fact it was raining, I was dry.
Right.
And I went into another room and I turned a switch, and all of a sudden there was not only light, but there was hot water.
And food in your refrigerator.
Count on it. And these are things so many thousands of people in Atlanta cannot take for granted. And so the number of people who recognize that and are coming to bat in that favor has grown. It depends on where in the community, but look, the blank family has, as part of the growth of the Mercedes-Benz Stadium, has decided to work heavily in that area. That place didn't exist 20 years ago. And so all the programs from the West Side Future Fund and the Blank Family Foundation's work at Hollis Innovation Academy and at Brown and other places didn't exist. We're a more sophisticated community. Our legal community has grown dramatically. We have attracted national firms. They have offices here. And people have grown an understanding of something interesting, and that is you can do well by doing good. People have grown an understanding that their clients want to see you, that law firm, invested in this community. They want to see that you have a diversified staff, and they want to know where you're going. And more recently, the law students are coming out, and when they interview, they are saying to their would-be employers, what are you doing?
What's your pro bono policy?
If I'm here, where will I have a chance to interface with this community? And then they use other social media terms I don't understand. But
well, and the other thing that just dawned on me also is with this is not only is it attractive for the law students to work someplace that cares about the community and will give them this opportunity. It's also a great law opportunity for them, a legal opportunity, because especially in a larger firm, when you're starting off, you may not get that hands-on experience right away that you can get with guidance at AVLF.
Exactly that. We ask the law firms to trust us to take good care of your associates. If you're an associate at a firm, it's not likely that in your first or second year you're going to try cases. At a big firm particularly, you're going to be in the office, you're going to be doing motion work, you may come and watch a proceeding in the federal court. But if you work with AVLF, you will stand up in a court of law, You'll have lots of support and help from your firm and or from us, but you will interview clients. You'll cross-examine witnesses. You'll speak to judges.
You'll negotiate.
You will negotiate. It's a critically important part of the, where else are you going to get those opportunities? Right. And that's part of what we are glad to offer to the community.
Well, where I was going also a moment ago, talking about your job, you have recently announced that you're going to step down at the end of this year as executive director.
Yes, sir.
How did that come about? Tell me about it.
I have had the ride of a lifetime at AVLF. And it's time for me to step aside. Partly because there are some other things I might like to try and do, but mostly because the staff of the Atlanta Volunteer Lawyers Foundation has grown from 6 when I started to about 10 in 2010, to about 15 in 2015, to now 42. We're a much different organization. We have much higher reach. We have national attention and if I may, some prominence. There are some things that we have a development team. We have community advocates. We have social workers. We have paralegals. These used to be just a couple of lawyers hanging out. Right. We're a much bigger and broader organization. And we have in-house a man named Michael Lucas, who has been our deputy director, who has a reach beyond mine. And I think when I step out and Michael takes over as the board of directors has decided we will thrive, Leigh. And it will be great for us to take on small examples. We've outgrown our current space. And my mind was to go and talk to our landlord about getting more space. And Michael said, and his team said, let's not expand our footprint. Let's knock down some walls. So we're going to an open floor plan. And things like teleworking and hoteling, right, and some of the other things that I think are reflective of the work that Michael and the younger lawyers in our group will be able to accomplish that don't come naturally to me. I grew up. I started law school in the 1960s, college in the 1960s, and law school in the 70s. Life was very different. And I think it's exactly time for the next group of very passionate, very creative people to put their hands around this organization.
Well, and what's nice is that you've done a good job of bringing him up and being able to have someone that you have confidence in and that other people have confidence in to take over the reins, because that's always a hard thing with an organization like this when you've had someone be as successful as you've been for 20 years.
That's nice of you to say. Several years ago, it was obvious to me that Michael was the next right person. We began a succession planning process with the help of a business coach in 2017. So I'm very optimistic that, if you're looking for the next executive director, you create from scratch, it would look a lot like Mike Lucas. He's going to do wonderful things with this organization.
Well, that's great.
Very kind of you to be interested in AVLF, and I thank you for allowing me to be on this podcast and sharing information about an organization I love.
Well, Marty, I appreciate your coming and doing it. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, and I look forward to seeing the next great thing that you do, because I know you will.
Thank you. You're very kind, sir. I look forward to working with you, Leigh.
Thank you, Marty.
You've been listening to The Future of Resolution, the podcast. You can follow The Future of Resolution on Miles Mediation and Arbitration's Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. If you haven't yet, go to Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, and subscribe, rate, or review this podcast. Join us soon for another interesting discussion. Thank you for listening.